Yes, what became of the captured?
Once captured by the Barbary corsairs, the immediate future was bleak.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's your boy again, Shady, the one and only, and today guys we are back. Okay, good evening to all of you. Okay, if you guys know me, you know that I love history. I love checking out the history of things so we can have a deeper understanding on topics. All right, I believe in knowledge. All right, because ignorance, you see, ignorance is no an excuse. All right, it is not an excuse. So we need to learn and know the things that have been, the things that were, so that we can understand the things that are. Wow, I sounded so clever saying that. Anyway, that's it too much, guys. Let's get started. Okay, subscribe to History on Fleek. We're going to check out the stomach churning things Barbary pirates did to white slaves. To be honest, I never knew about white slaves till recently. I mean, I knew about the Slavs, but I'm talking about Europeans being taken away. Slavs are Europeans too. Anyway, let's get this started, guys.
Pirates from Africa, armed with cutlasses, went door to door taking men and women.
He said African pirates armed with cutlasses, machetes. Yo, it just reminds me of gangsters these days.
Pirates from Africa, armed with cutlasses, went door to door taking men and women. The coastlines of Europe were no longer safe places to be. The Barbary pirates rocked Europe's most preeminent powers of the maritime, taking people as cargo and rendering coastal defenses useless. A slave trade flourished from this activity, and the impact on the people was unimaginable. Welcome to History on Fleek.
To be honest, like the thought of there being a white slavery, yeah, of the Africans coming to Europe to take slaves, it was news to me. I mean, now it's not news anymore, but anyway, let's carry on.
Today we examine the stomach-churning treatment of white slaves by the Barbary pirates.
North Africans.
Across the 16th to 19th centuries, pirates from North Africa were joined by Ottoman Empire raiders as they captured and enslaved people across the coastlines of Europe. Called the Barbary pirates as they operated out of the Barbary coast, a region of North Africa's coast including modern-day Tunisia, Libya, Morocco, and Algeria. Also known as corsairs, their main area of operations was in the Mediterranean, hitting coastal towns and formative ports, usually raiding the villages for slaves. Motivated by an opportunity and desire for wealth, the pirates would take the captured back to North Africa for sale, most prominently to the Ottoman Empire. The thousands of enslavements that took place under the pirates were a devastating trauma upon individuals and communities.
I've always wondered who they sold the slaves to. So they sold the slaves to the Ottomans. Ah, so that makes a lot of sense. I've always wondered why Turkish people look so very European. Sometimes they look more European than some European people. All right, they have those distinctive features. Now it makes sense. They mix their genes with Europeans.
This effect would be felt in the long term over decades. Make no mistake, the Europeans lived in fear of the rampaging Barbary pirates.
Wow.
So effective and potent were they in their coastal raids, the Barbary pirates can be credited with the start of defensive forts on coastlines and even the development of European navies. The pirates from the coast of North Africa were a force to be reckoned with.
Mad.
Their plunder on the coasts of Europe reached a legendary reputation. Coastal towns and merchant ships for some time were more or less fodder for the well-armed and swift pirate fleets. Writings from around the time give an insight into just how overwhelmed the shores of Europe appeared.
I can't
Following
imagine.
a raid on the coast of Cornwall in 1625
Cornwall.
that captured some 60 men and women into slavery, the Vice Admiral of Devon, Sir John Eliot, would comment, "The seas around England seemed theirs." Raids were commonplace across the 1600s. Ireland's southwest coast of Baltimore was plundered by some 200 pirates, to the tune of 107 Irish natives being captured and taken back to Algiers. By 1640, it was understood some 3,000 to 5,000 English people were captured in Algiers, and a parliamentary committee for the British Parliament was created. The Committee for Algiers set up charities and united local fishing communities to raise money between them to liberate their captured peoples. Evidently, the initial action against the Barbary slave trade didn't take. By 1650, the English fishing industry was under threat.
Madness.
So regular and affecting were the pirate attacks, English fishermen became reluctant to take to the sea and leave their families ashore, vulnerable and unprotected from the potent pirate force.
Wow, the Barbary were this notorious. There was so much of a threat to Europe like this, so much of a threat even to England. Crazy. Yes, what became of the captured?
Once captured by the Barbary corsairs, the immediate future was bleak. Surviving the long voyage from Europe back to North Africa was no guarantee. Many would die on the way from a lack of food or water or the onset of disease or illness. Should one survive the mortality-breaching journey, the next stop would be standing at a slave market for hours, being inspected by buyers before the sale at an auction. Accounts for those who had survived being enslaved were wholly telling. Samuel Pepys's diary included accounts of talking to slave survivors of the Barbary trade. In 1661, Pepys's account includes them speaking on how they were given nothing but bread and water to eat, and how they were beaten at liberty on their stomachs and the soles of their feet. Following a purchase, slaves were put to labor and work in a variety of ways. The work of male slaves working the manual labor of heavy construction efforts and quarries was the norm. For women enslaved, housework and servitude of the sexual variety was the course. Chillingly, at night, slaves would be kept in overcrowded prisons known as baños. Though laborers or concubines for the Ottoman Empire were hardly fates to be desired, there was one worse fate enforced by the Barbary pirates.
Was it?
Slaves could be assigned to work the oars in the galleys of the very Barbary ships plundering and bringing back slaves to Africa. Shackled to their seats, slaves turned rowers were never allowed to leave. Astonishingly, this meant a life almost in its entirety consigned to sitting at an oar, eating, sleep.
Sitting at an oar all through. Imagine the cramps they'll be getting, the blisters they'll be getting on their bums and their hands as well. And then think about their mental health.
Urinating and defecating all took place at the position of the oar. Be assured, in this inhumane setting, any lapse, slip, or sign of insubordination was met with a whip across the back. The Barbary slave trade would be felt far and wide, even crossing over the rich literary culture of the time.
You're telling me it's not just black people that went through this? That's why I said, you see, history, we need to learn history. We need to study history to understand, understand the things that have been, the things that were, the things that have been, and the things that are. It's mad.
The author of the iconic novel Don Quixote, Miguel de Cervantes himself, was captured and enslaved by the pirates from 1575 to 1580. It would take a raised ransom from the Trinitarian Catholics and his parents for him to be a free man again.
Wow. That is crazy.
After enough people went missing, fishing industries were tanking, and budding navies felt humiliated. The powers of Europe would strike back. Across the 17th to 19th centuries, the western states whose coastal towns had been under siege would wage war with the Barbary pirates. The United States went to war with the Barbary states not once but twice. The first was fought against the Barbary states of North Africa from 1801 to 1805.
4 years.
The second war would come 10 years later. In 1816, a brief war with the Barbary state of Algiers would encapsulate the state of naval politics at the time. Following this war with Algiers, the U.S. would end its tribute payments, which were supposed to protect the U.S. from pirate attacks. The European coasts would also gather forces and mount attacks on the pirate states. In 1675, with a Royal Navy squadron behind him, Sir John Narborough was able to negotiate at least a temporary peace with Tunis. British bombardment was the method chosen to bring peace with Tripoli also. Yet the fighting over supremacy of the seas would continue over the coming centuries. Algiers would be a focal point of the conflict, attacked from the sea by French, Spanish, British, and yes, American warships. 1816 appears a seminal and conclusive year for the war on the Barbary pirates.
Those were really dark times for Europe, man. In fact, those were dark times for the whole world. Imagine what was being done to black Africans. Yeah? Imagine what was being done to them.
Amidst war with the U.S., an attack from Dutch and British fleets led to the liberation of over 4,000 Christian slaves, and finally, the Barbary corsairs were in decline from then on. Ultimately, the legacy of the Barbary pirates is not a simple matter. The power and efficiency they had, the dominance they showed over the Maritime's most potent forces have been both romanticized and vilified across history. What is undebatable is the impact their raids and slave trading had over the people and regions they targeted.
Wow. This is
The legacy of the
insane.
Barbary pirates is a remarkable one and an insight into the world at the time oft forgotten. While the Barbary slave trade would lose steam from the 17th century and would be essentially disbanded following the French conquest of Algiers in 1830, its impact was profound yet also timely. The slave trade of the Barbary states is hand in hand with the 16th to 19th century Atlantic slave trade. While rarely spoken, this is context. The Barbary slave trade was an arm of the Ottoman Empire. At a time where empires were warring in the maritime, taking slaves was a grim part of the battle for global supremacy. Across their 4 active centuries as slavers, some academics estimate that the number of Europeans enslaved by the Barbary corsairs likely tops over 1 million. There can be no clean comparison between the
Crazy.
Atlantic slave trade and the Barbary slave trade, however. People captured as slaves by the Barbary pirates were to be sold in North Africa and the Ottoman Empire. This being said, the corsairs also enslaved people of color and non-Christian whites from Eastern Europe. It was not a clear-cut case of Muslim and African enslavement of Christian whites, as the reverse can be true of the Atlantic slave trade. Furthermore, there are many instances of the corsairs' most effective operators being European.
Okay, so the victims were basically everyone, not just like one religion, like whoever you are, non-Christians, Christians, probably maybe even Muslims from certain places, but you, so long as you're not one of their one, you're a potential slave.
Many of the most notorious Barbary pirates were privateers from Europe who sailed to the Barbary coast in peacetime, purely to earn a pocket independently. Outcast European renegades were able to bring the most current naval knowledge to the Barbary slave trade, explaining raids as far from North Africa as Newfoundland and Iceland.
I see.
Last but not least,
Traitors.
parallels between the Barbary and Atlantic slave trade divorce radically in terms of outcomes. Typically, slaves of the Barbary trade could be sold to wealthy individuals and families in the Ottoman Empire,
Okay,
converted
class.
to Islam, and afforded an affluent education, and a chance at respected roles in the royal guard or harem. The Atlantic slave trade left no such chance of social mobility or chances of elevation for the individual. Surviving the Middle Passage was trauma, followed by years of trauma. Finally, slavery is slavery. Either trade is littered with continual instances of sexual slavery and woeful record and decimating women's autonomy. Curiously, despite the Atlantic and Barbary slave trades having a similar timeline, the European perceptions of North Africa and the Muslim world were indelibly dented. European literature and art would reinforce negative stereotypes about the people in the region. To this day, we can witness the long-standing miscomprehension and conflict between Europe and North Africa and the Muslim world and how this continues to shape cultural attitudes and global politics. This is History on Fleek, and we'll see you next time.
Wow. We are beginning to see things like this. I mean, not exactly in this form of slavery, but it's just that every time we go down history, we always come across a few things. We always come across Christianity, we always come across Islam, all right, we come across slavery most of the time. But there being wars is almost an absolute. There's always wars. I'm telling you, it's just crazy. Like, those times are so hard. Every empire wanted to take over. All right, there's the Ottoman Empire that was trying to Islamize the whole world. Then also there was the British Empire that successfully colonized most of the world. In fact, invaded 90% of the whole world. That is insane. Okay, their methods must have been so efficient for them to be able to do that. But hearing this about the North Africans, enslaving Europeans, is something that's sort of new to me. The black slave trade, that is what we know about, that's what we've seen, that's what we learned in school. But things like this, I've not learned about it. Okay, I know that, okay, when people go fight wars, they end up taking slaves of these other people, but to have it as a trade, insane indeed. Okay, I hear that there's still slavery right now in the Arab world. Okay, I've seen some videos, I've seen some articles and some things. I've heard people say a few things, but I'm like, really? All right, we need to research into that to find it out. Okay, but what does it take a human being, all right, to value another human being's life? Nothing. Just remember that we are all one family. But some people feel that their race is better than the other race. Some people feel like they must take this lesser race to serve them. They strip people of their freedom. They treat people inhumanely. How can one do that? Because I don't believe in what you believe. Why do you want me to become a slave to you? That is so sad, you know? All right, people have that freedom. But it's a part of the world that's no freedom. All right, thank God for the Western world. The Western world have given people freedom. Okay. Anyway, it's crazy. Yes, I'm glad that we've learned a bit of this, and I hope you guys have learned something as well, like I have. So I'm gonna catch you next video, guys. Peace out.
Oh, I love you more than words can say. You are me. Oh, you are the light that shines my way. You are me. Oh, I love you more than words can say. You are me. Oh, you are the light that shines my way.